because you're triggering it, because you're giving yourself so much information. And in the day and age that we live in right now is a day and age where we've got so much information. Everybody is the equivalent of a genius these days. I want to do this podcast because I know that we're going to provide a tremendous amount of value for people, for those people that see the value in growing. Rich people educate themselves, poor people entertain themselves. Hey guys, MrJcRangel. Welcome to the Driven Not Given podcast. Excited to be here. This is actually the first podcast. It's actually a pilot, right? But I'm excited. I've got my buddy here, Jay, helping me with the setup. And so we're doing this pilot, but you never know. This might end up being an actual podcast episode that we're going to release, right? So, and this is, by the way, impromptu, right? I just decided, hey, let's go ahead and shoot it. I'm going to talk about something. So when I started talking, I had no idea what I was going to talk about. But I like to think that in situations like that, I do pretty well. But one of the things I do want to talk about is the podcast and why I am launching a podcast, right? There's a lot of reasons why. Now, one of those reasons is simply because, first of all, it's fun, right? Second of all, nowadays, I believe that having a podcast for some people is a very smart move. If you've got the time, if you've got the resources, if you've got the connections or whatever the case may be, and the desire, of course, right? But for me, launching a podcast, and this relates to my business, right? Kind of, because this is a podcast on mindset, on business. I'm going to be interviewing very, very successful people, not just entrepreneurs, but athletes and people from different walks of life. And I happen to have the good fortune to know and have a pretty good relationship with a lot of very interesting people that have achieved big things, whether it's in the fight world, whether it's in the entrepreneurial world, or whatever the case may be. But for me, when I started launching this podcast, the mindset of this podcast is to build an asset, right? Why? Because I'm going to meet new people. I'm going to learn from these people. I'm going to get some of the value that these people have for the world and have them bring it out, right? And provide value for other people. And another thing that the podcast is going to do is I'm going to ask on every episode, what would the advice be for their younger selves? So let's say I'm inviting Mr. Pink, right? There's a, what is that movie called? Reservoir Dogs, if I'm not mistaken. That's a reference to that movie. It's a great movie if you haven't seen it. But the point is, let's say I ask Mr. Pink, what is some advice that you would give to your teenage self, right? And we're going to elaborate on that, maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, however long it goes. Because one of the things that I want this podcast to do is I want it to give value to anybody that watches it, including teenagers, including kids, right? Because I take me growing up, right? When I was growing up, I had the good fortune to have a karate teacher, to have an incredible mother, first of all, right? Well, first of all, God's help. An incredible mother and a incredible karate teacher that kept me out of a lot of trouble, taught me a lot of things at an early age, like the importance of discipline, the importance of consistency, which ties back to discipline, right? The importance of delaying gratification, right? And so some of the things that I learned there were very helpful. Now, if I had a podcast, and when I was a kid, there was no podcast, there was no internet, but if I had a podcast to listen to other people that are making it happen in life, right? For example, like how to deal with peer pressure and different things like that. That's a big deal. And I feel that that's something that's very lacking in a lot of homes, especially in the minority communities. There's no father figure there, right? And so those are the things that I'm going to interview the people, and I'm going to ask them what advice they would give to their younger self, especially their teenage self, or maybe they might want to share what they would give to their 21-year-old self, their 18-year-old self, right? And so I want to bring value. Additionally, I want to learn. Additionally, I want to grow my network, right? It's not about, there's an old saying, it's not about what you know, but who you know. That's true. And I think that's partially true. But I think what's even more true than that is it's also about who knows you. Now, if I go ahead and I get my buddy Jay, right, who's helping me here, right? And I'm going to interview Jay in the podcast as well, right? But if I interview Jay, right, and let's say we don't really know each other, but we do a podcast for an hour, guess what? I just built my relationship with him. And in business is about building those relationships, getting people to know you, you knowing people, those people knowing you. So to me, from a business point of view, right, I've got my solar business, I've got my credit repair business, and I've got my podcast, right? And a clothing line that's coming along with that. Well, I'm not looking at my podcast the first year, maybe even the second year, to necessarily be profitable. Matter of fact, I don't necessarily expect it to be. What I do care about is, hey man, I need some tax write-offs for the year, right? So I'm talking about the business side of it, right? Secondly, I want to build a network. So maybe the podcast itself wasn't profitable, but the connections that I made to do business outside of this podcast is what made it profitable and what made it so much worth it. And additionally, for me, it's a social thing, right? Between running 3 businesses and between my family and everything else like that, I don't have that much of a social life, which I'm okay because I do enough socializing in my business and my day-to-day business anyways. But it's also a social thing for me, right? So to me, I think one of the keys to business is also managing your expectations, delaying that gratification. The younger me would have expected, hey man, in 2-3 months, 4 months, can we have a profitable podcast? And granted, I would love for that to happen. And I believe that I'm going to do all of the things necessary to make that happen. But that's not really my mindset. My mindset is provide great value, have great interviews. I'm going to have interviewed episodes where I interview somebody. Then I'm going to have episodes where, like this one, where I'm just talking by myself, just giving some value, right? For those of you guys that know me, you already know that I'm a motivational speaker and a sales trainer. And I've got a lot of great content that I want to share with people that I believe is a value for people. And one of the things that I preach all the time is I recommend other people's podcasts, but I tell people all the time, listen, because this is a podcast, as the intro says, for winners, for entrepreneurs, for millionaires and millionaires in the making. Well, guess what? What is your favorite Lamborghini commercial? Guess what? You don't have one because Lamborghini does not make a commercial. Lamborghini knows that the people that are sitting at home watching TV, they're not at home, right? Watching TV. Excuse me. The people that are driving a Lamborghini are not at home watching TV. Does that make sense? So the same way that I tell people, listen, if you want to take your business and mindset to the next level, don't go out there and spend the time, watching funny videos all day, scrolling and liking Instagram pictures. If you're driving, go listen to a good audiobook. Go listen to a good podcast that provides value, that you get better. Sometimes I listen to some of these podcasts and I'm like, man, that was valuable. Man, that was something that I used to know back then. I forgot about that. And one of the things about personal development is that you have to learn, unlearn, and relearn. There's some new things you must learn. Everybody, right? Nobody knows it all, unless it's God, right? Then there's some things you have to unlearn, right? We all have bad habits, right? And I love the quote. First, we create our habits, and then our habits create us. So we have some bad habits. We have to unlearn some of these things. Some people have to unlearn how to be so damn negative. One of the quotes that I say very often is, some people are so negative, they could walk into a dark room and develop, right? The point that I'm getting to is that you have to unlearn some stuff. Then you have to relearn some things that you knew back then. Some philosophies that you had back then in the past that you don't have now. Then it reminds you, it triggers you. Oh, that's right. I'm going to start applying this again. Why? Because you're triggering it, because you're giving yourself so much information. And in the day and age that we live in right now is a day and age where we've got so much information. Everybody is the equivalent of a genius these days. Everybody's the equivalent of a genius these days thanks to the internet. 20 years ago, that's not the case. Now, if your son or daughter asks you something, you've got the answer, right? You could ask Alexa, hey, Alexa, whatever the case, ask whatever question you want. Everybody is the equivalent of a genius. Do you want to learn how to be a better speaker? Guess what? You could go for free and get that information, right? You want to learn to be more confident? You can learn that. You want to learn how to edit podcasts? You want to learn how to start a podcast? You can get this information for free. The thing is that this asset that is available to the world is an asset, but that same asset is a crutch to the majority of the population. Instead of using it to get better, what do they use it for? To entertain themselves. There's an old saying, it's a quote that I love. It says, rich people educate themselves, poor people entertain themselves. And isn't that the truth? So I want to do this podcast because I know that we're going to provide a tremendous amount of value for people. For those people that see the value in growing, getting 1% better per day, 1% better per week, 1% better per month even 1% better per year, you realize that most people on a yearly basis are declining instead of increasing. Their worth is declining, not only because they're getting old, but they're not getting any better. They're not getting any wiser. Matter of fact, they're picking up more bad habits. So I see that this is a niche, right, that is powerful. And I'm going to take full advantage of it by bringing value to people. And I'm going to meet some very interesting people along the way. And thoughts are things. I fully believe beyond a shadow of a doubt that I'm going to have people on my podcast that are famous people. I'm not talking about celebrities. I don't care to interview hardly any celebrity. There's a couple of them that I would, but I'm talking about sharp people. I'm talking about Conor McGregor, Grant Cardone, the Wolf of Wall Street, right? Even Elon Musk. I don't think that that's out of the question, right? Now, my conscious mind may be thinking, come on, you're going to interview Conor McGregor, Elon Musk. The conscious mind will fight you. The subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between the truth and a lie, right? So one of the keys to success is to believe bigger, faster. So I'm bringing up this whole thing about success right now because I am going to build this podcast to be a very successful podcast. Now, it's going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight. I'm going to do everything that I can, put one foot in front of the other to get it to that point. So anyways, again, this is a test pilot for the podcast. When I opened my mouth to start talking on this video, I had no idea what I was going to say. Literally no idea. This just came out of nowhere, right? But I got my buddy Jay here helping me out. We're setting it up. We don't know if we're going to do it in this room or in another room in the house. I've also got some podcast room outside of here where we're going to interview the guest. And I'm excited for this journey. I appreciate you guys taking the time to take a look at this video and join me on my first podcast. And most of you guys have been on my trainings. You know that I always say I'll see you at the top or from the top. God bless you guys. Wish you all the best. And I'll see you on the next episode. Take care.